Let's talk supply chain. So, welcome to the show, Nelson.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah, for having me. It's a fantastic format. I'm very much looking forward to it.
I am so excited to have you here today. I mean, you have a fascinating entrepreneurial background, and your mission with Modify is really unique and just brings a much needed mindset to the industry. Talking about collaboration, visibility, empowerment, and ease in the complex world of global trade and finance is definitely rare to say the least. So, I'm looking forward to finding out more, and let's just get into the conversation, right? I think there's so much
Sure.
that we can talk about today. So let's kick it off
hmm
with your founder journey because you're actually a lawyer, but you're also an entrepreneur. And Modify isn't the first company you founded. I mean, the last company you founded, you sold to Klarna. So I'm really intrigued by you as a person and to understand how those two worlds sort of come together.
Yeah, indeed. My journey is a bit of a special one, I would say, but it makes sense when you look back and go back to the beginning. So my dad actually was a sea captain and a pilot on these large container ships. So shipping
Wow.
is deep in my DNA.
Yes.
Nonetheless, I started my career as a lawyer as far away from shipping as I could, probably back then, and practiced also for a few years corporate law and had lots of private equity customers or clients, as we called them back then. And then I graduated, so to say, from lawyering to business by joining one of these large private equity funds, a US based fund called Service Capital Management.
Mhm.
And this fund was really specialized on banking and financial services. So that was really my first exposure to the business world of banking. And I saw firsthand how difficult that is. And then in the financial crisis in 2007 and 8, it was a bit boring because there were no more new deals to be done, right? As an investment professional, you want
Right.
to do new deals. So I took a break and then I started my first fintech company, BillPay, which was back then the leading provider for buy now, pay later services in the German speaking part of Europe. And indeed, we sold it to Klarna in 2017.
Amazing. And those are really important services, especially right now. I was just having a conversation with somebody that was looking for those kinds of services. So I think you and I might need to connect after this. And so, how did
Sure.
you come to co found Modify? What were you seeing in the world of corporate finance, trade, and supply chain that inspired you to think, I can do this better?
Yeah. I think after this sale of my first business, we wanted to take it and to the next level, take all the learnings, right? We also did quite some mistakes in the first venture, and build something much bigger and even more exciting. And
Mm.
as founders, we were very intrigued by very large markets with almost unlimited growth potential. And when I look at global commerce and business payments, these are massive markets, probably the largest markets I've ever worked in. We talk about some $20 trillion global commerce per annum
Yes.
and some $35 trillion market
Mhm.
for international business payments. So it's massive. And when you look at how clunky and complicated global commerce and cross-border payments still are, and banking is per se, we really thought, we can actually do this, right? We can actually make a change for the better, and use technology to really provide better solutions, faster solutions, much more convenient solutions. And we all know as consumers how great technology is helping us in our day to day business or life. I think in a business sense, it's a bit different, right? It's a bit more, global commerce feels a bit like e-commerce from 20 years ago, I would say.
That was very, very, very true. So what is it that Modify does then? How do you help your customers? I'm so intrigued. I really want to know more.
Yeah, maybe I should decode Modify first, right? So Modify stands for modern digital finance. And what
Hmm.
we are doing is we empowering global commerce with digital business payments and trade management services. So with Modify, sellers or suppliers, whatever you want to call them, they get paid instantly and buyers can pay their invoices later. So it's
Huh.
really also a buy now, pay later solution, if you want to call it that way. And what does that mean and why is this important? I think the beauty of our problem we are tackling is that it's hundreds of years old, right? So sellers and buyers
Yes.
are always negotiating about when sellers get paid, and sellers want to get paid as soon as possible, buyers want to pay as late as possible, right? They want to receive the shipments to sell on the goods and then only pay the suppliers. So what we also see is, bigger buyers typically have so much bargaining power that they say, look, I will place the order only when I get payment terms, 30 to
Right.
180 days, or sometimes even longer. So net 30, net 90, net 120, as you call it in the US. And that is really causing a huge problem for many suppliers because they have to wait for their money. They had all the expenses, they
Mhm.
had to pay their staff, the raw material manufacturing, the
Yeah.
shipment, and then they still have to wait for a couple of months to get paid. So that is a big problem. And we are solving it with a, I think, very neat digital solution.
Well, and traditionally, that's all been done with, letters of credit, right? Or original bills of
Mm-hmm.
lading and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And even when I was in the logistics side of the business, not even 10 years ago, I looked at it and I was like, what are we doing? This is so archaic. Like you're
Yes,
actually shipping a piece of paper across the
yeah,
ocean to be able to
it is
hand it
crazy.
to a logistics provider, but first, wait, no, you have to sign the back of it, because if you don't sign the
Yeah.
back of it, it's not transferable.
Yeah,
So,
people
the
don't believe
logistics
it if they haven't worked it, right?
That's
It is
right.
absolutely crazy, right?
It's absolutely crazy, like, I get this original bill of lading, it's not signed, I gotta send it back, get it signed, then I send a message overseas, and they let the shipper know, and then it can be released. Like, it's
Yeah.
honestly, like, this was really only up to 6 years ago, and I think sometimes it's still being used, and so, let's talk a little bit more about that, right? So, Modify works for
Hmm.
both exporters and importers, so let's take a look from each of their perspectives. Let's start with the
Hmm.
buyers. Now, when I was doing my research for the show, I was amazed at the way you're mitigating risk for them. Fixed exchange rates, up to 120-day payment terms. And that's amazing. So, talk us through exactly how Modify works for them and the benefits.
Yeah. So I think the service you just mentioned, I think that's what we call a buyer finance, right? And that really is geared towards importers or buyers who order goods from larger suppliers or larger sellers.
Yeah.
That could be, for example, an Amazon marketplace buyer who wants to order 10,000 e-scooters, and then he probably has to turn to one of the four big suppliers in China. And if he convinces them to one of them to accept the order, they will for sure insist on a upfront payment.
Hmm.
And that is a real problem again also for that buyer because he has to pay upfront a couple of hundred
Hmm.
thousands or even millions of dollars to China and has to wait for the goods to arrive so that they can sell them on, right?
Hmm.
So that is creating obviously a real cash flow issue for the buyers. And what we offer then for these buyers, that they simply upload the invoice and select of how much time they need to pay us back, up
Okay.
to 120 days. And we pay on behalf of that particular buyer, the Chinese supplier in that example, for example. So that was basically it's a payment which goes out immediately, and then supplier can ship the goods, the buyer can receive the goods, and still has 3 4 months or so to receive them, to sell them on, and then hopefully with the proceeds can also pay us back. So I think the core value proposition of that, and it's a win-win, right? So the buyer basically can buy the goods and pay for them later, and very often they even get a discount for paying early, so they can grow their business and they can grow their margins at the same time. So I think it's a very neat solution.
Yeah, and I've got a couple of questions there because first is obviously all of the money sort of tied up in the product if they're doing it the traditional way. At least with
Hmm.
you, because there was always sort of that transition period, right? The shipper is they are responsible for a certain part of the journey as well as the product, and then the buyer is, and there's this time when it's on the water or in the air, right? Where all
Hmm.
of this money is sort of all cooped up in this product
Yeah,
and nobody's making money off of it. And it was such a
exactly.
hard thing to really tackle. And so it sounds like you guys have really found a way to make it work for both sides. And we'll get to the seller side in a minute. But one of the
Hmm.
questions that I have for you is the risk that you're taking on. And so like as a freight forwarder background, I know for us that we were used as a bank, right? We would pay the
Hmm.
ocean freight charges to the steamship line so that the container could get released. But then we weren't getting paid for 30, 60, 90 days. And so we were kind of
Hmm.
acting as that bank. And that was
Yeah,
really, really difficult. So, what about the risk for Modify? How do you mitigate that risk?
yeah. I think what you say is exactly right. So ultimately, in this product, we have a counterpart, the buyer, who has to pay us back, right? I think it's always a buyer, regardless of how you play
Yeah.
it, whether we serve the seller or the buyer. So I think it's always, in terms of credit risk, is always really the buyer who is most important for us. And so we obviously do underwrite every single buyer we support with that product.
Mhm.
I think the interesting way of looking at credit, so to say, or credit risk in this field is that it's always tied to a specific transaction. So it's not a blank check, a blank line of credit which you can draw and spend for whatever you feel like, for marketing, for
Yeah.
staff, for a new office, what have you. It's always linked to a specific transaction.
Hmm.
I think that's pretty important. And then we obviously can also look at very interesting data sources, understand, have these parties already traded before? Have they behaved? Have they delivered good quality?
Right.
Will there be any issues probably expected from quality deficiencies, or not the right number of e-scooters shipped or so? So I think we try to mitigate a lot with alternative data, and it's all short term, right? It's always 30, 60, 90 days. On average, we have roughly 60 days outstanding. So
Okay.
for us, the decision is more, will that will that buyer be able to pay us $100,000 back in 60 days and not 5 million in 5 years time? And that makes a
Right.
huge difference on how you can assess risk.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that. That was just, a question that I know probably some of the audience is sitting there thinking, well, what about your risk? But let's talk about the
Yeah.
seller's side, right? So
Mhm.
Modify assumes full buyer payment and collection risk, which is amazing. And that means that sellers can get paid instantly. So talk us through how that all works for sellers and what is the impact of being able to optimize cash flow like that traditionally they haven't been able to optimize before.
Yeah, indeed. So we help exporters in around, I think, 14 markets across Asia, Middle East, Europe, and North America. So this is actually our core business. So the buyer finance was a starting point, but I think the bigger business now is really helping exporters with these problems, and we call that product seller finance.
Okay.
And as mentioned before, very often these exporters have to grant up to 120 days payment terms for their bigger customers to secure the
Mhm.
order. So we provide these exporters with fast and secure liquidity. So they upload their invoice on our platform. We pay them 80 to 90% of the invoice value within 24 hours. So they get cash more or less immediately within days versus weeks or months from traditional banks. And once MODIFI collects then the payment from the buyer, let's say Walmart, for example, right? The seller
Mhm.
would get the remaining 10 or 20%, whatever was kind of outstanding in the beginning. So this is really, I think, a very classical, factoring solution when you think
Yep.
about it from a financial services point of view. But it's delivered in a very, very digital, very neat and smooth way, and it's very easy to set up. It's really a pay-as-you-go solution. Like, we all love it as a consumer, right? Nobody wants to
Mhm.
pay, like, for everything in one go, or being tied up to
Right.
long contracts. It's really all invoice by invoice. The exporter decides what to do, and when to use us, and without basically that providing that cash. Obviously, on top comes the risk protection part. Right, we assume the risk of, ultimately, the risk of the bankruptcy of the buyer. Right, will that buyer be still around in 3 months'
Yeah.
time when the payment is due? So we take this over because we have better resources on assessing risk. And this is, I think, a more and more important feature of that product
Yes.
in recession scenarios
Mhm.
with higher interest rates, lockdowns, and all the stuff we have seen in the last 2 years or so, where even established businesses, retailers, and brands struggle as buyers, and so would basically their sellers struggle if they wouldn't get paid. So we empower export customers to trade with confidence, really.
Yeah, and you take a really critical component that needs to be done, but doesn't always get done by vetting those buyers for them because sometimes they just don't have the department or the people to be able
Yeah.
to do that. And you say yourself that not every business can match their credit worthiness or payment requires the same way that a decade old company can, which is what we're talking about, right? So I love how this all really helps to level the playing field. Why is it so important to empower small and medium sized businesses? Like, what impact will that make globally by being able to utilize your solution to really level that playing field?
Yeah. So when we looked at those markets, I was really stunned to learn that roughly 38% of global commerce is done by small and mid-sized businesses, right?
Right.
That's a whopping 8 trillion worth of business today.
Wow.
And I think that I was really mind blown, right? And when you then look at case studies and research, I think there was a common view that the gap for financing trade was around 1.5 trillion per annum. And this is
Wow.
expected to grow now to 2.5 trillion roughly in these current crazy market conditions, right? And it's really mostly the small and mid-sized businesses which need these fast and secure liquidity, especially in developing countries where local economies are often struggling and the banking systems is
Yeah.
not that strong. So for us, it's all about also the financial inclusion of those businesses, which make a huge difference in the local economies in many markets. And I feel that every time I visit customers and partners in countries like India or Bangladesh,
Mhm.
they really rely on those kind of services to be at their fingertips. So it has a huge impact, I think, also in a local, global, small world we are living in. Right, everything is
Yeah.
interconnected, and typically the smaller guys have a bit of a harder time to play properly on this playing field.
Well, and we've kind of seen that over the last couple of years as well, how important small and medium sized businesses are, and how important it is for us to be able to support them so that they can make that impact that you're talking about globally. So, then to
Mm-hmm.
support all of this, you also have a shipment tracker so that businesses can have full visibility into their trades and access all of this data in one place. Talk to us about this. So, not only are you a financing platform, you're also tracking shipments.
Yes, indeed. Yes. So the shipment tracker is one of our trade management services, I should say. And I think it all started when we started MODIFI. We were surprised to learn that many of our customers really didn't know where the goods were once they left the factory, right?
Very
So,
true.
and then, like the Ever Given was jammed the Suez Canal.
Mhm.
And then, like COVID came and congested ports were doing their parts of, like the strained supply chain. So, in all these situations, we felt like, well, if you don't know where the goods are, I mean, like it's not good for us, right? As modified, because we
That's
ultimately
very true.
finance what's good in transit. So we wanted to know. And then we said, like, if we want to know and we build tools to understand where our goods are or the goods of our customers are,
Mhm.
why don't we deliver these services also to our broader customer base? And I think shipment tracking is only one of these services. I think there's
Mhm.
a couple of other services which really, I think, are geared towards typically small to mid-sized business because they don't really have these great tools that large corporations have.
Yeah.
And it really helps them to, you know, find new customers, have quality checks checked, like get their trading smoother, get the customs smoother, understand credit risk and counterparty risk per se, foreign exchange, currency fluctuations. These days, I mean, massive difference, right? When I look at the US euro foreign exchange fluctuations, it's crazy, right? It's unheard of
Yeah.
what we have seen. So very often these smaller businesses have not really sophisticated tools. And what we strive to do is now that we give them access to a couple of very smart tools on this platform so that they really have one single place to go. And they can finance their trade and get the payments done, but they could also see where their shipment is or where maybe the next customer is waiting around the corner.
Well, and that their partner that they're working with is also looking at what they need to be able to do their business, and that the 2 of you can win together by knowing where
Indeed.
that shipment is, right? I mean, it just
Yeah,
keeps
yeah, yeah.
everybody, and it eliminates some of that communication back and forth, right? Because you know where it is, they know where it is, and so neither of you are having to go back to each other to find out where the shipment is, when it
Indeed.
relates to the financing as well, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So
Indeed,
let's talk
indeed.
about integration and onboarding. Because I would
hmm
imagine that in the onboarding process, you're definitely going to have to vet the buyer. I would assume that you're going to have to vet the seller as well. So, what does all of this look like for the buyer and the seller?
Yeah, I think a great question, and it looks always trivial, but these are very important success factors, I would say. And I think
Mhm.
that technology can really make life a lot easier compared to what people have to go through with traditional players like banks, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So what we always have in mind is even the small and mid-sized businesses, when they are like run by very digital owners or managers in their private life, they are not very often like real super tech heavy, I would say, right? So we wanted to
Yes.
make it as easy as possible. So actually customers can use the service without any tech integration. They can
Ooh.
simply sign up on our website and get access to a customer account. And whatever we need then to process the payments or to onboard the customers per se can be uploaded and should be uploaded on the website. All communication happens digitally, mostly via email, but also in some markets via WhatsApp. India, for example, runs on WhatsApp, it seems.
Yeah.
So that is, I think, designed to be very lean and self-explanatory. Of course, we have account managers who are there to help, right, in case something is not as clear as we thought it would be. But
Mhm.
they can actually get started without any tech process, I would say. We have customers and partners who can integrate deeper via APIs, web interfaces, and
Okay.
then connect the systems directly. And that obviously allows a more seamless service, a higher level of automation, and even faster processing. So especially when we work with other digital platforms, we typically go via APIs and not like invoice by invoice uploading and logging in your account.
That's good.
I think another part, the onboarding part, is actually also pretty important, especially since we are
Mhm.
providing ultimately financial services, right? And we all know how clunky that is when you actually work with traditional banks, and the business part is even worse. So our onboarding is also fully digital. It can be done in one day if you have your documents together. Um, and why is that? I think the big information advantage we have is that we pull lots of the information required for identifying customers, KYC, know your customers, right?
Yep.
We can actually pull that in the background and ask the customer just to confirm pre-filled fields on registration data,
Great.
name and address of the business, and so on, right? And everything else can be uploaded, and we do a video ident session to check the ID cards or the passports, whatever the customer
Right.
wants to use. So this actually, when you compare it to the stacks of papers and making signatures and in-person verifications and bank branches, that takes months, right? And we can actually do that with the help of technology in a day. So I think that makes a real big difference.
Amazing, and you're keeping it simple, and I don't have to
Yes,
fill in all the blocks. Because 'Cause I'm
indeed,
thinking
indeed,
about,
indeed.
like an onboarding, and I gotta go through pages and pages and re-enter information, and you're saying
Exactly.
that it's gonna come fillable, which I really like. Well done.
Yeah, yeah. It's just I think we all know how painful that is if you have to do it
Yes.
over and over again. It's like, yeah, you know who I am, right? And you know my
Yeah.
business, and we have done business, and just look it up yourself, right? Look at my website, visit the
Yep.
commercial register, whatever is applicable. So I think tech is just like, so much more convenient if you, apply it to the business world as well.
Absolutely. So we know you want to empower small and medium sized businesses. You work with exporters and importers alike. What does an ideal client look like for you? If I'm sitting in the audience and I'm like, I really, really love this service, who am I? And what am I looking for? Maybe what do I look like?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think also something we thought about a lot, and actually, like, the 4 years we've been doing this, things are also changing. I think per se the platform can cater to the needs of very different businesses of all sizes, and we have thousands of importers and exporters, actually of all sizes. So from 1 to million revenues
Hmm.
to billion revenues, right? So it's actually quite a stretch. But when I look at the value proposition we bring to the table, I think it is particularly strong for companies which ultimately buy and sell goods or services internationally. So I think the cross-border complexity, I think we can really help to bring it down.
Yes.
And
Hmm.
those businesses who are somehow having not an easy or not at all an access to cross-border payments and working capital. And very often those businesses tend to be in a revenue range between 2 million and maybe $300 million,
Okay.
and order or invoice values between $25,000 and up to $750,000. Do we have smaller invoices? Yes. Do we have larger invoices? Absolutely. But I think there the value proposition is extremely strong because they are sophisticated enough to actually trade internationally. If
Hmm.
you're too small, you probably don't trade with like proper volumes internationally.
Yeah.
But if you're very very big, you probably have already your own tools and your own ways of doing it, or you are so big that you actually create the problems we are solving for your counterpart. So I think that's maybe the company sizes we are working with mostly.
Great. Great. Thank you for sharing that. And I know there's a few in the audience that are definitely going to be reaching out about this. But now it's time for the
Hmm.
case study. And this is always my favorite question because it helps to bring everything we've talked about to life, right? So, can you paint us a picture of how you've worked with one of your customers? What was their challenge and what was the impact or ROI of your solution?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when I look at all the customers on the platform, I think one company comes to mind here, which is actually an Indian headquarters exporter with production facilities all over the world. Most of them is in Bangladesh, and sales offices also all over the world. So we have multiple different offices we are working with, and they design and manufacture high quality apparel. So really cool stuff,
Yep.
and it's quite sizable businesses. And they have fantastic buyers, right? So they serve and sell to Nordstrom, for example, the American luxury department store chain, or to Inditex with Zara, like the very large Spanish multinational clothing company, and many others. So they had exactly that problem, that these large buyers were really asking quite aggressively for payment terms, and made that more or less a condition for doing business with them. And they had simply, they were well and are well capitalized, but they really couldn't afford to take on new orders
Hmm.
because they had to wait for too long. So liquidity was not really allowing to accept even more business. So they wanted to grow, but they didn't have the capital to grow it. And their business was also a little bit volatile, right? I mean, the last 2 years were
Yep.
definitely a bit demanding, I think, in that respect. So they were looking for, like, very easy, fast solutions for having basically available capital on, at the fingertips,
Hmm.
and not being tied up in super long term contracts. So that they can actually, like, use it when they need it, right? And not paying for it when they don't need it. So we enable this business to grow their customers, especially the larger customers who are creating this issue, with additional working capital and with credit protection. Also these days, really, for that customer, they were also facing some issues. That they said, look, I lost a lot of money a couple of years back when one of my great buyers didn't make it,
Right.
and want to avoid this. So we want to kind of outsource that risk assessment to you guys. And I think that was, a very, very nice situation to solve, because we were able to onboard them very fast, very flexible offering that they can tap in if they have, like, lots of orders, and they can also not use us, which helps them also, right, in terms
Mhm.
of fees, that they can really turn it on and off as they want. And I think that was a perfect customer for us, because we had this
Mhm.
fantastic, like, manufacturing somewhere in Asia, shipping to the more kind of larger buyers. Ultimately, the American consumer is very important, I think,
Yep.
for our businesses. So I think that is actually a very important customer. We do, like, depending a bit on how they use us, between 60 and 100 million volume per annum, which is
Wow.
quite sizable for them.
Absolutely. And it's saving them a ton of time and money, and especially in the risk department. I mean, everybody's
Yeah.
looking to mitigate risk right now. And that is huge for any company, anywhere really in the world globally. And you can just imagine,
Hmm.
right? Getting paid right away or getting paid in 120, maybe 180 days when your money's gone out in product. And, like you said, you've paid all your staff and everybody to make the product, but you don't have the payments coming in. And so the access and the cash flow has just got to have made a huge impact on the business. Plus, they're also being able to customize it, turning it on and off when they need it. And that is huge as well. You're not just having to use the platform every single time you have a customer, right?
Exactly, exactly. So you're not tied down, really. I think that's this
Mhm.
flexibility, I think people really value a lot. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, in a lot of ways, the worlds of supply chain and finance are kind of similar. You could say that they're both traditionally a little stuck in their ways, but you are really working to push those boundaries and challenge the status quo. Talk to us about a little bit about why that's so important, especially now at this time of global disruption.
Yeah. I think that's a great point, right? So, yeah, coming back to our mission, right? So it's really all about empowering global commerce, and this
Hmm.
is a macro theme, I would say, for our customers, and for us as a company. and we are fixing a very important part of that piece of the puzzle, right? So we provide business payments and liquidity ultimately, but I think trade is really so much more complex, right? From sourcing
Mhm.
material, finding good, reliable suppliers and customers you can grow with, and logistics and regulatory and customs don't get easier, right? So I think the traditional service providers we have in our space, very often banks, they lack a bit this holistic view on the business transaction per se. They focus a lot on their specific solution in their specific field, let's say payments or only doing customs or whatever,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
And I believe that if you leverage technology, you can change this. You can really allow customers to get the full picture. And with that full picture, also get much more control over your own destiny. And
Mhm.
just imagine, one app or one interface giving you all that information in one place. And this is really what we are trying to become, right? The cockpit for international commercial transaction. And I think the beauty is that in these days, it doesn't mean that we have to build all these services ourselves.
Right.
I think we couldn't. I think we could not build a great, fantastic digital freight forwarding platform, quite frankly. But what we can do is connect to these other digital platforms, and there are many of those now, who are
Mhm.
all, I think, ultimately pursuing a similar strategy that they want to give like holistic views and be more than just their core value proposition. So a freight forwarding platform or marketplace can integrate our payment solutions and offer our services to their customers and probably even make some money on that, and the other way around, right? So we can also offer our payment customers services in logistics or order management from our
Mhm.
partners, which we don't build ourselves. So I
Right.
think we and our partners are really building the future of global commerce and make it that much more accessible than it has been before. So I think it is a very important mission.
So many great opportunities to collaborate. I mean, my mantra is collaboration is the future of business. And so you're totally talking my language. And we've kind of come down to the last question, and I want to focus on the future because you've grown impressively in the last 5 years. So, what does the future hold for Modify?
Yeah, so indeed, it seems that we tapped into a great market. So we are growing 4 to 5 times year on year, which is a fantastic exponential growth, and in many regions even faster. And we want to keep that pace as we continue our journey around the globe, right? So I think we also were broad with our customers around the globe much faster, covering roughly 80% of global commerce with our presence in the US and Europe and Asia.
Nice.
So I think this is also something we need to really also work a bit more and go deeper in those markets, because every one of these regions is you know providing billion-dollar opportunities at least, right?
Mhm.
Is there opportunity in Latin America and Africa? Absolutely. I think that's probably one of the next steps, not next year, but maybe the year thereafter. But I think all in all, we are still very early in the game. So when you look at it, probably like kilometer 4 of the 42-kilometer marathon, I would say. At least that's what I tell my team all the time. And there's such a huge demand for the services we are providing,
Mhm.
and the markets are so huge that with these markets, when they are so big, even 1% market share in global commerce would equate, like business of $200 billion worth of trades being
Yeah.
processed through Modify. And I think that's a bit like our long-term goal, right? So I think
Mhm.
there's a number of smaller players who are doing 1, 2, 3 billion maybe, which is I think definitely also great. But I think the breakthrough is really more like when you look at and compare ourselves to the global payment processing companies, for example, or the very large, logistics companies. I think this is more, I think, the peer group we strive to become. And yeah, I think we are well on the way. But again, like it's very early. Right? Still lots of kilometers ahead of us, I would say.
Amazing goals. I love to hear that, Nelson. And you have such a refreshing approach. It might be a stereotype, but global trade and finance has a bit of a reputation for being elitist and incredibly complex. And I don't think there are too many people out there trying to break down those barriers. But what you're doing with Modify is incredible. I mean, firstly, putting your head above the parapet with such an openly anti status quo mindset is brave in this industry. But even more than that, empowering small and medium sized businesses and helping them to access a global market is really so very important. It's going to drive development around the globe and really help create better and more competitive environments for all of us, right? It's really exciting. Previously, so many businesses just didn't have a chance of doing business internationally. And now, with a partner like MODIFI, there really is a world of possibility. So, if you want to find out more, you can check them out at MODIFI, MODIFI.com. And a massive thanks to Nelson for joining me and to the team at MODIFI for making this episode happen. Thanks so much, Nelson.
Thank you, Sarah. It was great having you.